We were on a mission to go after the #1 leader for Al-Qaeda in the Anbar province.
U.S. troops have just arrived in Anbar province. This is a huge move in the war on ISIS.
And we walked right into that ambush. Myself and several other teammates were shot up by machine gun fire. I was hit 8 times. I lost almost half of my blood. I was incredibly weak. I mean, my head swelled up to almost the size of a basketball. Both eyes were totally bloodshot red. You know, nothing left of my nose except for these orange tubes coming out, stitches.
I've also heard you say that the scariest moment of your life was not getting injured or anything before that. It was having your wife see your injuries. And you said that that was the most terrifying thing you've ever been through. Why did that terrify you so much? Despite being in combat, being shot at, like that's the thing that stands out as scaring you the most.
You know, flying home, I just felt like this monster. I was face blown out. Nothing but tubes coming out of what was, you know, left of my nose. And it's amazing. It still makes me emotional to think about it. But yeah, she came in the room and just...
So looking back at your childhood, are there any like memories or moments that stand out as being formative and crucial to who you are today?
Well, aside from being beaten and locked under the stairs for long periods of time, no.
Oh, really?
None of that happened, man. I had a pretty regular childhood, man. I didn't grow up on the wrong side of the tracks or anything like that. We didn't have a lot of money. My parents were divorced. I bounced back and forth, 2 of them. I'd say the biggest thing that took me down the path that I was on, my both grandparents were military, and I remember, you know, stories of them from World War II. My dad was Army, not career, but just the stories. So from a young age, that's all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to be in the military, you know, and I pursued that path from a very young age.
What age do you think that you decided that you wanted to be in the military and the armed forces, if you remember?
Oh, I mean, apparently when I was like 3, I told everybody I was going to be a firefighter. And then about the time I was 7, I switched to I was going to be in the military. And I never really lost sight of that. What I wanted to do kind of changed. When I was probably 11 or 12, I wanted to be a pilot like my grandfather. Top Gun came out, and, you know, I jumped on that bandwagon. And then somewhere along the way, I learned about special operations when I was about 13. And when I was 14, SEALs, up until 2001, went through U.S. Army Airborne School. So when my dad was airborne within the Army, and he knew and had met SEALs that had gone through airborne school. And he was the first one that ever told me about the SEAL teams. And yeah, once I heard about that, I just said, that's what I want to do. So about 14, I locked onto that and, you know, chased down that road. Kind of got dissuaded by a very crusty old asshole of a recruiter in the Navy office. So I almost did not join the Navy. I almost ended up, I was going to join the Army and go Ranger, Green Beret path. But I failed the airborne physical because when I was a kid, I ruptured my eardrum. So they saw scar tissue in there, and they just, you know, sometimes the military, they can be very black and white in their interpretation of things, as, you know, when you're moving people through a system real fast. So they failed me, which really was it was a little bit of a gift in retrospect. I was disappointed at the time, but I went and got, I had to get a ENT doctor basically look and say, hey, look, this guy, I knew I could equalize. I had dove. I had done other things. So I had to get an ENT basically to sign off. And in that time frame, the crusty old recruiter had left. There was a new Navy recruiter, and he was like, hey, I hear you're that kid that wanted to be a SEAL. Well, let me help you. And he did. A great guy by the name of Henry Horn. So he took me down that path, and I joined the Navy, amazingly, on September 11, 1992 was the day I signed up.
So that when that 14-year-old going into the office and pretty much being told that he can never be a Navy SEAL, what made you continue to try to pursue that path? Because I feel like at 14, you're very impressionable. And like what people say to you about like people internalize that and they think it's truth at that young of an age. What made you just go for it despite what that guy said?
Yeah, I've got a great trait that's also a pain in the ass trait, and that is if you tell me I can't do something, it just drives a fire in me to do it and prove you wrong. So that was pretty much it. Like, and everybody told me I am not what, funny thing is, a lot of people have this idea in their head that SEALs are these great big muscle-bound Arnold Schwarzenegger-looking dudes. And don't get me wrong, we have some guys that look like that, but that's not really the average SEAL. I'm on the smaller end of the spectrum. I'm 5'7", I'm about 170 pounds, give or take. When I was in high school and said I wanted to be a SEAL, at 15 years old or 16 when I first walked into the recruiting office, I was probably 5'5", and weighed about 100 pounds. So needless to say, they laughed me out of the office. And I had a lot of friends or people who didn't know me who caught wind that I, was saying I want to be a SEAL, and everybody said, oh, you'll never make it. And that just drove me. And, it's one of the interesting things you'll find about SEAL teams. It has very little to do with this and so much more to do with this. And, as a matter of fact, frequently you will find the biggest, most athletic individuals who you would normally look at and say, oh my God, that guy's going to crush me. Frequently those are the guys that quit first. And it's the scrappier, smaller guys, and even sometimes you have guys who aren't in the best of shape, who you would be like, that guy will never make it. That's the guy that makes it.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about Hell Week? Because everyone has these, what they think it's like, but like, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about how it actually is?
Man, I've heard such crazy things out there that make me laugh. I've heard they drown you, they hold you underwater till you drown, and then they bring you up and resuscitate you. I've heard you have to kill a puppy in SEAL training. Some ridiculous things out there. The puppy thing is totally not true, ever. That never, ever happened in the history of SEAL training. But the drowning thing is kind of interesting because, no, they don't hold you underwater, but there are a lot of evolutions that guys pass out. And there are many evolutions. The 50-meter underwater swim, which nothing in SEAL training is straightforward. Everything has a twist designed to be unfair to make it more difficult. And because of that, frequently, many, many guys will pass out in that 50-meter underwater swim, and then they have to be brought up and obviously, revived. In Hell Week, a lot of what they tell you in Hell Week is, the things that are out there are pretty true. Hell Week is brutally difficult. It lasts roughly, a little over 5 days, and goes from Sunday to Friday. And during that week, the average student gets 2 to 3 hours of sleep that entire week. During that week, you probably 90% of the time you are wet, coated in sand. It is you are constantly moving. You are constantly doing very difficult evolutions. What a lot of people don't realize is every week in Hell Week, you have to do a run, an obstacle course, a swim, and various other physical evolutions that are all timed. And Hell Week is no different. So, except the only difference during Hell Week is now you're doing all this extra stuff, but you still have to pass your run. You have to pass the obstacle course. You have to pass all these things on top of all the massive mind games and the adversity you're facing from that. It's not uncommon. The majority of guys quit by most individuals in Hell Week. You'll lose 80% of the class in Hell Week. That is a true statement.
Wow.
And the majority quit within the first 48 hours. So by Tuesday night is kind of the big clean out. And really by Wednesday morning, it's pretty rare that you have individuals that quit after that. They pretty much have culled the people out who are not 1,000% committed to be there. The interesting thing, Wednesday into Thursday, guys start hallucinating, That's all true. You'll see things. I remember on Friday, your body's so sleep deprived, they're called micro sleeps. And it's just that your brain is so sleep deprived, it as a survival defense mechanism, it just puts you to sleep. Like running, like I will never forget, I was running under the boat on Friday morning, and we were by the SEAL compound, and we were running down to the demo pits, which are about, I don't know, a mile and a half away. And I remember kind of looking over at the compound, and the next thing I know, we were at the demo pits. So I literally was sleeping under the boat as we ran down the beach. So pretty amazing what the human body can do. It is definitely very difficult, but it teaches you a lot. I mean, I attribute making it through Hell Week with the ability to overcome so many difficult things, including the night that I was wounded. And I know a lot of SEALs that have been in super difficult situations in combat have said the same thing.
Wow. Was there a moment where the thought of quitting like entered your head? Like, did you ever consider it while you were in the middle of it?
I think it was every other moment. So
wow.
Yeah. No, man. Absolutely. I think everyone. I think there's only one individual out there who will say, "I never once thought about quitting," and those individuals are called liars. It is very difficult, and everybody gets pushed to their breaking point. The instructors are very good at doing that. And most of the time, I don't want to say all the time, there are some amazing genetic freaks who are really good at everything. But the vast majority of people have a weakness. For me, I was a good swimmer. I wasn't a great swimmer. So that could have been a weakness for me. And they will look for these things, and they'll use them to put pressure on you to try and create additional adversity and pain points and discomfort to push you over the edge to get you to quit if you are an individual. So any of those things can apply, and that's what they want to see. They want to find out, hey, what is your push button that we can really get you going? And then once they find that out, how do we continue to apply that pressure? And either A, you quit, or B, you harden up and you push through it and get to the other side.
Fellas, do you want your grooming routine to be a one and done deal? Well, the days of using the same trimmer for your face and your private parts are over, thanks to our friends at Manscaped. Manscaped is now offering the ultimate package to trim both your beard and the boys downstairs using 2 separate razors, because, I mean, why would you want to use the same razor for both? And so in this package, you'll find the beard hedger. And what really sold me on this is that you can actually pick the setting that you want. And so without even taking off this top part. So you just find the perfect length for you, and then you're all set to go and trim your beard, and it comes out perfectly. And then this right here is the Lawnmower 5.0, and this is for the boys downstairs. You can get 20% off your order and free shipping if you use the code Young and Alive at checkout. Again, if you use the code Young and Alive at checkout, not only do you get 20% off, you also get free shipping on your order. Thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring today's video. So when you're in those like terrible moments where like you feel like you're going to quit, what did you tap into? Was there something that you kept on telling yourself, or is it just like you were just so committed to where like you knew you weren't going to quit?
It's probably a combination of both. I think what I try and tell people is you've got to look past the situation you're in. I have a online course called the Overcome Mindset course, where I talk about how we deal with adversity in life. And rule number 1 is don't physically quit. And it's interesting. It's the same lessons that I talk to other young guys that are going through SEAL training. The interesting thing is, both in life and in SEAL training, quitting is most of the time an emotional response. And I try and explain to people, because when I was younger, I didn't see it this way. I felt like if you ever stopped anything, that was quitting. There are strategic reasons to stop doing things in life. Most of the time, when you quit, you are in a massive moment of discomfort or pain, and it's an emotional response. I don't think I can do this anymore because this is too painful, or I am too uncomfortable. You don't know the outcome. You don't know how long it is. So you're basically saying, I don't know how long I can endure, when you don't really know how long that is. You may be able to endure for a whole nother week or months. but you place this limit in your mind and allow emotion to creep in, and that's why guys go ring that bell. But what I tell them, and it's no different in life, I watch this with individuals in business situations, relationships, sports, I don't care what it is. They'll quit because they have allowed the emotions and the pain and the discomfort to build to a level where they think, I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, why would you do that? Because you're making an emotional decision when you don't really know the outcome. And the thing is, you can't really control that. There are unknown variables out there that you don't know. The only variable that is guaranteed is if you don't ring the bell in SEAL training, you have an 80% chance of graduating. So we have an 80% attrition rate, but if you remove ringing the bell, you now have an 80% chance of graduating. There's some performance variables, and there's some obviously injuries are a big thing that gets guys in training. Those are the things that are unknown. So I tell guys, don't physically quit. Don't ring that bell. You can't. That is the one thing that you can control, and that applies in life too. I always tell people, if you truly feel like you want to quit, if you truly feel like, hey, I just can't do this, never do it in the middle of the pain and discomfort. At least get to the other side and then reevaluate. Decide, hey, when you're not emotionally compromised, when you're not compromised by pain and discomfort. So everything in SEAL training has a beginning and the end. I mean, Hell Week has all these different evolutions. So you'll do maybe 3-4 hour evolution, and then there'll be somewhat of a break before you move to the next evolution. There'll be a meal. There'll be, a time for everybody to go to the bathroom. So, it's during those times there's a little bit of comfort. You could try and get warm by huddling with your buddies or things like that. It's in those moments that you reevaluate and you say, hey, in the case of Hell Week, I would say you need to wait to the end of Hell Week. But most people don't do that. They'll quit right in the middle of whatever emotional thing. Number 2, don't mentally quit. And this is an interesting thing. The vast majority of people in this life quit long before they ever physically quit. They quit up here before they actually quit whatever it is they've decided. So that doubt creeps into their head, and it happens in SEAL training. We'll be getting, we used to call it surf torture, and they're not allowed to call it that anymore. That's too damaging to say. Yeah. So it's now called, I think it's called surf immersion therapy. Same thing.
It's the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, you lay in the water. You lay on the beach, head down with your head towards the ocean, locked in arms with your teammates, and the waves crash over you. So you're getting sand and the water in your uniform. And out in California, obviously, the water is very cold, so they keep you out there till you're near hypothermic. And many guys, and you'll do that all throughout Hell Week. So many guys, the first time they do it, they do okay. But then after you're cold for so long that your muscles are locking up from shivering, more iterations of, surf torture, you start to question, do I have the ability to do this? And that's where that doubt and the mentally quitting starts. Start telling yourself, I can't do this. You're on the glide path. Mentally quitting always intersects with physically quitting. So I try to tell people, you got to change your mindset. You got to tell yourself, I can do this. I have the ability to do this. Yes, it sucks. It was going to suck. I knew it was going to be cold. I knew it was going to be miserable. So I can do this. I will endure. The other people are there with me also. So, and then the other thing I tell people how to avoid it is many people in this life, we get caught up, and SEAL training is phenomenal for this, in this idea that, hey, it's not fair. Something happens to you. Now, you're already emotionally compromised because you're going through something hard. You're already doubting yourself, so you're starting to get into that mentally quitting zone. And then something else comes along that knocks you off your path that was unexpected and might even be deemed unfair. And that will cause people to just break. SEAL training is designed to be that way. And a lot of special operations training is designed to be that way. We will give you we will tell you, hey, you need to go do A, B, C, and D. And you'll go execute A, B, C, and D, and you'll do it flawlessly. And then the instructors, when you're done, will be like, hey, dumbasses, why didn't you do P? And you're like, well, because you told us to do A, B, C, and D. And they're like, we don't care what we told you. You should have done P. And then you get beat for it, and you'll be doing serve torture. And, they'll blame someone they'll try and create dissension. They'll be like, Brian, you should have done P and told the class to do P. So now the class is like, we hate you, Brian.
Yeah.
And it just creates chaos. And what happens, and it all through training, they'll do this. And what happens is you either get very mentally hardened to the fact that, guess what, it's going to be unfair. They're going to tell us how to do it, and then they're going to fail us, and then they're going to beat us for not doing it right when we did it right. And if you can wrap your head around that, and you can put a smile on your face, and you say, let's go, guys. Let's go get beat again for doing it right. You'll make it. And it's a lot like life, man. Life is not fair. We all have these great plans, and oftentimes they go sideways. And it's the people who go, okay, well, I'm going to keep driving forward and figure out a path. That is the overcome mindset. That's what I teach in that course. That's what I try and tell guys going through training. And if you can apply that in your own life, you'll definitely find higher levels of success.
So you finally finish Hell Week. What's that feeling right after when you finally get a warm shower, you get a warm bed to sleep in, you get a nice meal? What's that feeling like?
Amazing. Making it through Hell Week's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, the biggest thing I remember, we finished. The first thing they do is they've got to medically check you. They make sure everybody's okay, because it's not, like I said, you'll chafe holes in your body. I mean, guys will be bleeding. They'll have holes. Fingernails and toenails will have fallen off during the week. So the first thing they want to do is medically check, take care of everybody. And then they fed us. So we had pizza and Gatorade. And then a lot of us went and called family, and then a lot of guys went to bed. I wanted a hot shower, so much so that the shower bay in the basic SEAL compound was kind of like a 12-man open bay shower with these 12 jets that 2 on the end and 5 down each wall. And I went in the shower and I adjusted every single jet into a metal and plastic chair I dragged into the shower from my room. And I turned all the jets on and passed out in this chair in this glorious warm shower to try and heat my frozen bones. So that was kind of the culmination of Hell Week for me.
Wow. I did hear you say that you went through a party phase. Is that true?
That is true.
Wow. So is it one of those things in the military where you're kind of the outsider if you don't? Because I have some friends who are they're in the military, and that's what I'm hearing, is that it's very you're the weird person out if you don't follow the crowd in that way.
It is true. In the past, I've heard that dynamic is changing somewhat, but no, the military was definitely, and I think warrior cultures throughout history have been that way. A lot that I've studied, it seems like that is the case. Definitely the many of the militaries that I met around the world also. Hey, you train hard and you play hard, and that usually involved a lot of alcohol. Here I was, this young, impressionable 17-year-old kid that joined the Navy, and really, I had dabbled a little bit in drinking and stuff like that, but I did not do much. I stayed away from drugs because obviously I knew that, hey, if I got busted, then it ruined my chances going to the Navy. You need a clearance, and obviously back then you couldn't have any drugs in your, in your background. So, this 17-year-old kid who came from a relatively poor family in a very protected Christian upbringing in rural North Carolina. I joined the SEAL teams, and it was we drink like Vikings. So, start drinking, kid. And yeah, I embraced it. I had a great time. I I lived life to the fullest at a young age, and probably leaned too much into that. I look back on that now. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had a blast. I mean, training hard and partying all over Central and South America as a young man was an amazing life, and getting to do many things in the SEAL teams. But yes, it is it's tough to be the optimal version of yourself. Here's the thing that I think a lot of people are realizing, and now that I'm older, I'm almost, I turn 50 next year. It's very difficult to be optimal with a lot of alcohol in your system. The SEAL teams had no human performance program when I was younger in the SEAL teams. Now we have a human performance program that, rivals the NFL. Because we recognize, SEALs, it takes about $10 million to make a SEAL. That's a pretty expensive asset. So we want to make sure that they are, that we are doing everything in our power to teach them how to be nutritionally to be optimized, physically to be optimized. We teach them about sleep. We teach them about all these different things that when I was a young man, we did none of that. And that was kind of the old culture of the SEAL teams, which in some ways it was a lot of fun. In other ways, I wish I had been locked on a little tighter to be truly, and figure out how to be the optimal version of myself. Some of us joke, though, we're like, man, if we were able to do everything that we were able to do as poorly as we trained and as much as we abused our bodies back then, imagine what we could do if we actually did that,
It's also, too, when you're the 18, 17, 19, the pain isn't as much the next morning, but I feel but is that the case? When did you really get out of that phase? Was it when, was there a moment where, you woke up hungover one day and, you were, you did terrible on a training or, you made a big mistake?
No. What brought me out of that phase was, it's part of my story that's told in the book, The Trident. I was making mistakes as a young SEAL. I had become an officer. So I'd done well enough as an enlisted SEAL to get selected for an officer. So remove the partying part. I did pretty well as a young enlisted SEAL. Obviously, when it was time to work, I worked hard. And accelerated. I had become an instructor, and I got recommended to be commissioned. So I got selected for a commissioning program the Navy had. They sent me to school. It was about that time that I got married. And so for 3 years, I was at school. Part of the ROTC, there were some other SEALs there that I was friends with. We all trained together knowing we'd be going back to the SEAL teams. 9/11 happened while I was at school, so now it really kind of changed the dynamic that, hey, when we get back, we're going to war. All our friends, obviously, that was happening. When I got back as a young officer, though, a lot had changed. The world kind of changed. Militaries typically operate based and train based off the last period of sustained conflict. So in the United States military, a lot of our old tactics were still based off somewhat, remnants of World War II and then, Vietnam, really. There were still a few Vietnam era guys, rare, but still around in the SEAL teams. A lot of our training was based on that. That was all the things that I grew up on and learned. When we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, we quickly realized, hey, a lot of these things don't work. So there was a total rewrite of the way we did things in the early years of the war. Well, I came back in 2004. So a lot had changed. And I will say some of the mistakes I made as a young leader was I let pride get in the way. Being a leader, you don't have to know everything. And it's not a sign of weakness to ask someone who may be junior to you, but they may have more experience. Hey, man, I don't know how to do this. Can you teach me? If anything, it's going to actually build better trust and communication. And for whatever reason, I didn't see that. I saw it as a sign of weakness. I was like, hey, man, I'm this older, experienced guy. I should be the one knowing how to do these things. And I didn't. So I was making mistakes. So I started drinking pretty heavily again and hanging out. And I just was drowning my sorrows, if you will, which was not helping the situation. It was only further damaging my credibility as a leader because I became known as a drunk. I didn't realize that. It wasn't until ultimately I made a bad call on a mission in Afghanistan, and all of this came to light. You know, the mistakes I had made, like, hey, guys view me as a drunk. And that was a very hard moment. It was a very hard moment to be told you're not tactically measuring up, you're not measured up as a leader, and oh, by the way, you're viewed as a drunk. A very hard moment, a rock bottom moment. I actually almost took my life. I sat in a chair with a gun in my mouth and thought that that was the only way out of this situation. And thankfully, you know, I think the big man above kind of smacked some sense into me and made me recognize, like, hey, you know, you can still fix this. In my TED Talk, I talk about this. You know, the end moments often lead to new beginnings. And that woke me up more than anything. That really slowed down, if you will, my drinking. To date, I still drink every now and then. It's pretty rare that I drink that much anymore. It just, you know, as I get older, I recognize, you know, having your faculties, being aware, being the best version of yourself, that's what you need as a leader. And if you're going to let your hair down, that's okay. You just need to plan for it and make sure you're in the right environment and you're not doing anything that can damage your credibility. But that whole rock bottom moment was what really changed it.
Can you walk through that mistake in Afghanistan? And something that I also, when I was hearing about this story, that I understand is that it was just like the fact that the people in your team like outcasted you after that, and they were saying like, I don't want to work with him anymore. Can you just walk through all of that?
Yeah, special operations. I mean, some of the military, unfortunately, if they have bad leadership, they just have to deal with the bad leadership. One of the great things about special operations, at least on a lower tactical level, you know, we have a few officers and then the majority of our guys are enlisted guys being our you know, pipe hitters. Officers still operate with them, but obviously we're making some of the calls, and then you have some of the senior enlisted. It's kind of a joint relationship there. But one of the good things is that if an officer or even a senior enlisted leader is making poor decisions that the guys feel like, hey, you're going to get us killed, or you're dangerous, or you're a liability, they can lobby together and go to the leadership and say, get rid of this guy. That's kind of what happened to me after I'd made those mistakes. And I'm very fortunate. My commanding officer really went against some of the guys who said, hey, get rid of this guy, he's dangerous. But thankfully, he believed in me and said, hey, I think this guy's got potential. I think we need to humble him. And he gave me a second chance. And I had to rebuild myself. It was a very difficult process. We're a hard community. We don't tolerate failure or screwing up very well. And I know other guys that have screwed up and left just because the cold shoulder they got and the difficulty in trying to win back the trust of the individuals that you broke that trust with. It took me about 2 years to earn back that trust. And man, it was a grind. It was day in, day out, just focusing on, hey, I'm showing up to be the best version of myself. When it's time for me to lead, I'm going to step up and lead. If it's time for me to follow, I'm going to be ready to follow. I'm going to make sure that, I'm always dialed in and ready to go. And thankfully, over that time, I think the guys saw, hey, this guy has the ability to do the job. I also had a great leader. This is one of the other, if you're fortunate enough, for those out there, if you've ever messed up, and number one, focus on leading yourself first. That's the most critical thing. And then number two, if you're coming back into a team where maybe you're having to overcome a leadership failure, having someone who believes in you as a leader is a huge win. And that's what happened with me. My boss at the time was a great guy, and he just said, hey, Red, I know what happened in Afghanistan. I don't care. He said, all I care about is from here forward. So he said, I'm going to give you opportunities to lead. And when those moments come, hey, I expect you to step up and shine. And it was great because obviously if you mess up, it kind of shakes your confidence a little bit. But it also has destroyed the confidence of the individuals you should be leading. So it's a two-part effect. He was smart enough to recognize, hey, if I can get Red to do well, it makes him more confident in himself, which we're going to step him up into higher levels of leadership and more complicated problems. And B, the guys believe he has the ability to do this, which is the most critical thing, especially in combat. So slowly over time, that's what happened. He would identify those situations, and he was like, hey, this is a really complicated training scenario. Hey, Red, you're in charge. Let's go. And then slowly over time, I earned back the trust of the vast majority of the guys. I always say it. There's, I'm sure, a small group, maybe 10% of the guys out there who know me who'd be like, fuck that guy. And that's fine. I mean, that's life. I'm content and confident in myself. I'm never, ever on a stage like, hey, man, I was the Hercules of the SEAL teams. Never. There were far better SEALs than me, but I was a good SEAL. I made some mistakes. I came back and was a slightly better SEAL than I was in the past.
So if I remember the story correctly, you then go to Ranger School after that, correct?
Yeah.
And there was a moment where you quit in a way, right? There was some training and you did it wrong and you quit. Is that right?
Well, it was at the very beginning.
Okay.
And so it was at the very beginning. And that occurred before any of this leadership redemption. That was right at the very beginning. One of the things when my commanding officer said, hey, I believe in you, there were a couple of things that happened. Number one, there were certain things that he put in place. One of those things was to send me to Army Ranger School.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I was a little bitter about that in the beginning. And I showed up with a chip on my shoulder and a bad attitude. I failed one of the first evolutions on day 3 of Ranger School, the land navigation course. Not intentionally, but in some ways a little bit of my own doing. And when that occurred, when I checked in to the event, I knew I had failed. And the Ranger instructors, there's a friendly and sometimes not so friendly rivalry between the SEALs and the Rangers. I was the only SEAL in the class. And the Ranger instructors were very excited that I had failed and were really laying into me, and giving me a lot of grief. And I allowed that remember I said we make bad decisions in the middle of the emotions, never quit in the emotional context. And I basically told the Ranger instructors what I thought and said they can take this course and stuff it. And they were like, are you quitting? And I said, yes. I had to go see the Ranger Colonel. That was part of the process. And really, I regretted it the moment I did it. I mean, I've never quit anything in my life. And I was like, oh my God, what did you do? You're an idiot. But I couldn't undo it at that point. So I met the Ranger Colonel. And I'm very fortunate that guy really saved my career. He happened to know a very respected SEAL officer, one of the more respected SEAL officers, a guy that I had served under. And he got me on the phone with him. And I remember telling him, sir, I've messed up too much. There's no way I can come back and undo this. Nobody's ever going to follow me again after this final mistake. And he said, Red, people will follow you if you give them a reason to. He said, go crush Ranger School and come back and give the guys a reason to follow you. And that really is the baseline of much of the structure that I teach others when I come into companies and then speak on these things. I call it the learn to lead methodology. But rule number 1 is leading yourself and giving people a reason to follow you. So thankfully, they didn't allow me to go back to my class. I had to roll back for a month. I got to enjoy Ranger School jail and walked around Fort Pickett for a month picking up trash.
Yeah, you were like 28, right, at the time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. So I had been in the military for 13 years when that happened.
Wow.
So it very much humbled me, and I needed it. I needed it. It gave me that month at Ranger School jail is probably some of the biggest growth I've had as a human. I took a lot of time to reflect that I wasn't as great as I thought I was. I took a lot of time to read leadership books. I took a lot of time to focus on how much I had been partying and how much not being the optimal version of myself. So all of that kind of got me on the right path. Went back, crushed Ranger School, and then came back to the SEAL teams and started working on earning back the trust and respect of the guys.
So when you go back to the SEAL teams for the second time, this is where you get wounded, correct? On September of 2007. Can you just walk through that story?
Yeah, it was the end of our deployment. It was a very intense deployment. You know, many of the guys that I've served with who did other combat deployments said it was probably one of the most intense combat deployments they did. DJ Shipley, who's out there in the spotlight quite a bit now. DJ was one of my teammates that night in that firefight and said out of all the combat he ever was in, that was by far the most intense and violent firefight he was ever in. So we were on a mission to go after the number one leader for Al-Qaeda in the Anbar province and basically landed on the first target, wasn't there, kind of had a plan. We saw some activity on another building about 150 yards away. We moved on that building. There was some vegetation we needed to push through before we got to the building. And we didn't realize it. The enemy leader's security detail was actually in the other side of that vegetation in an ambush line. And we walked right into that ambush. So myself and several other teammates were shot up by machine gun fire. I was hit 8 times between my body armor, body, helmet, weapon, side plate, and 3 rounds to the body. I took a round to the face, and I took 2 rounds in the left elbow. But very intense gunfight. You know, the 3 of us that were hit within the first 5 minutes, and pinned down. Led to this pretty prolonged, almost 30, somewhere between a 35 to 40 minute gunfight. We survived, only because, the guys fought back. They did an amazing job. I was out front and then pinned down after I got shot in the face. I was pretty much out of the fight within the first 5 minutes. And literally laying under machine gun fire that was traveling about 8 inches over me, and just focused on, hey, stay awake, stay alive. And I had to be patient to let the guys win that gunfight. I mean, it was something we knew. We've trained for that. And my team leader ended up calling in a close air support mission. We had a AC-130 gunship, which is a Air Force amazing air-to-ground offensive platform that probably has saved more lives on the battlefield. I mean, some people, I know a lot of people that play Call of Duty know it. Some people who don't know the military may not be familiar with it, but it is an amazing platform. It saved my life on multiple nights in hairy situations. And on that night, they ended up bringing in the closest fire mission ever executed in the Iraq War. We literally called rounds directly on our position, and thankfully survived. So intense night. But I owe my life to my teammates. I owe my life to that gunship. So
now, how does going to that almost like brink of death? Because if I remember correctly, like you thought it was over. How does that change the way you look at life now?
You know, I think the biggest thing I have another shirt. And, yeah, no bad days. So it's one of the lines of clothing that I have. And, coming that close to death makes you appreciate life and gives you a perspective on life. There were a lot of deep thoughts I had in the, 30 minutes as I was bleeding out, where I was facing the prospect of dying. So now it changed me in many ways. I mean, I'm much more grateful for the things that I have. I have great perspective. I very rarely, I mean, I can be an emotional guy. I can get, I can let my emotions boil up like anybody, but I'm quick to pull myself back in check, especially in situations that I'm like, this is nothing. I watch people who lose their minds over the simplest things that really is no big deal. Like, my Starbucks got delivered late, or you misspelled my name on my Starbucks cup, or my flight's delayed, or whatever it is, and that's just weak perspective. I meet so many people who talk about, oh, I'm having a bad day. And the reality is they're not really having a bad day. They're having a schedule disruption. Their day did not unfold in the manner that they had planned it or they thought it was going to. That's not a bad day. I define a bad day as anything that will forever leave physical, mental, emotional, or deep, deep financial scars. And if it doesn't meet that criteria, it's not that big a deal. So why are you going to let it negatively impact you? And more importantly, why are you going to negatively impact all the people around you? So I try to do my best to be positive and to, lean into people and not allow little situations like that to get the best of me. I tell people, if you woke up this morning, it's a good day. It's up to you to make it a great day. It doesn't mean you won't have hard days or tough days. It just means that every day you wake up is a gift. I don't know why I got to come home. I got so many friends who didn't. These are all the guys I personally knew who I either served with or I directly work with that did not come home. And most of them were way better SEALs than me. So why did I get to come home and they didn't? So I now try and live my life to be the best version of myself because I owe it to them, in my opinion. And I try and tell this to anybody that's ever lost someone. Like, hey, instead of, obviously you're going to miss them, but man, become the greatest version of yourself and honor them. Like, that is the greatest way you can honor and tribute them in this life. And that should be your fuel, man. That should be your bird.
I've heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this injury wasn't necessarily the hardest or worst thing that ever happened to you. It was what we talked about before, that mistake that you made that kind of ruined your reputation. Why is this? Because when people look at your life story, they might, like when they think about the hardest thing that's happened or the worst thing that's happened, they would point at that. But it was ruining your reputation that was the worst thing, and getting it back that was the hardest thing. Why is that?
Yeah, to be ostracized from a group that you've loved for something that you have worked so hard for. I mean, yeah, I was rock bottom. I was suicidal. And I was not mentally prepared for that. That's the other thing. At Overcome, I didn't see that coming in any way whatsoever. And a lot of that was my own arrogance. Arrogance blinds you to the world around you. It blinded me to who I truly was. I think individuals who, if you've got good self-awareness, your perception of yourself is pretty closely aligned with how other people see you. If there's a big difference, if you think you're God's gift to everything and everybody else just thinks you're a pompous ass, which is frequently the case, there's a big misalignment. And you may not see the downfall or the ambushes that are coming. And that's exactly what happened to me. Building myself back up after that failure, I was so much more self-aware. I was so much more mentally prepared for anything, including to be severely wounded. And I'd love to tell everybody that, hey, the second I, recognized I survived, I was like, hey, let's go, let's overcome. But that wasn't true. It probably took about 10 days to kind of come to grips with what had happened. I mean, obviously the severity of my injuries was severe. I mean, I lost almost half of my blood. I was incredibly weak. But to come back from that after about 10 days, I just said, hey, man, like, you've done this before. Like, you climbed out of that hole from your leadership failure, and the formula is the same for this. Leadership is the same, whether you're in a hospital bed, whether you're in a boardroom, whether you're on a battlefield, it's the same. And you don't have to have a title means nothing. Title, rank, corner office, none of those things make you a leader. What makes you a leader is your actions in the moment, especially when you're facing adversity. And the reality is you can lead from a hospital bed. It's just your attitude is going to be the biggest thing that impacts leadership. And I recognized that there. I just said, okay, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to drive forward and I'm going to try and set a good example for others around me and a good example for my wife and kids.
So similar to this, I've also heard you say that the scariest moment of your life was not getting injured or anything before that. It was having your wife see your injuries. And you said that was the most terrifying thing you've ever been through. Why did that terrify you so much? Despite being in combat, being shot at, like that's the thing that stands out as scaring you the most.
You know, if you ever find an amazing, if any of you out there have an amazing partner, an amazing mate, marriage, like really you're locked in tight, you know, it's a scary thing to think about that, like they make you better. You know, they're that person you lean on and you celebrate the wins with them and you navigate through the losses with them. And my wife was that person, man. My wife is an amazing individual. But we'd only been together for 6 years. We hadn't really been tested yet. We had been tested somewhat through the leadership failure. But I would say that was kind of more of my journey than her journey. She supported me in it, but I was the one that had to navigate it. When I got wounded, it directly impacted her. And I recognized, you know, we had 3 young kids. My daughter wasn't even 1 when I got wounded. My youngest daughter. I had a 7-year-old son, 4-year-old daughter, 1-year-old daughter. And now she would have to take care of this broken individual who was severely wounded, that, you know, facing years of being put back together. And at the very beginning, we didn't know what that outcome was going to be. And man, I was struggling with that. You know, flying home, I just felt like this monster. I was face blown out, nothing but tubes coming out of what was, you know, left of my nose. I'm trached, I'm wired shut. I had not seen myself in the mirror, but I saw a picture later. I mean, my head swelled up to almost the size of a basketball. Both eyes were totally bloodshot red. You know, nothing left of my nose except for these orange tubes coming out, stitches. Somewhere out there online, I think some of these pictures are out there. Somebody got a hold of them. But, so yeah, I was terrified. Like, how would my wife handle this? Would she say, oh my God, I didn't sign up for that? And there are marriages that have broken in the, you know, the military hospitals where wives walked in and saw a severely wounded husband and said, I can't do this. So that was a real fear of mine. I was terrified of that. Like, how am I going to do this if I don't have them? They helped bring me home. When I was laying there dying, I was thinking about them. Like, I have to survive and come home for them. And so funny, you know, the human mind, I always tell people, this is the most dangerous battlefield you'll ever walk. So many people check themselves out because of this. Once again, you don't know the outcome. This is not reality. This is, we're making up all kinds of different possible futures that have not happened before. Yet so many people make decisions based on this before it's ever unfolded. I mean, think about different paths, but man, let the real world play out. You know, try and shape it. So, and thankfully I did. You know, I didn't make any rash decisions, thank God. I mean, because I have known guys that were like, yeah, my wife can't see me, and I was very afraid to let her in the room. But when she came in, man, she came in like a hurricane into that room, and she told me, she said, no matter what happened, she said, I was not going to allow anything I saw to shock me. And I mean, that's amazing that she had the wherewithal and the mindset to think that way. I mean, that's an overcome mindset. That's a warrior's mindset. And it's amazing. It still makes me emotional to think about it. But yeah, she came in the room and just walked up to that bed and kissed me and said, hey, we're going to be okay. And that was amazing. That was probably one of the most powerful things that's happened to me. I needed it. She was like, we're going to do this. And I was like, fuck yeah, we are. Let's go. So
that must have been huge, right?
Oh my God, yeah. Huge. Yeah. So, and I don't think, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong. There were moments that were tough, but I think that was a launch point when I came home. Like, hey, you and me, ride or die, let's go. You know, so.
So, despite all of this, how did you avoid the victim mindset? Because I feel like that's the path that most people would go down, and I think the best example of this is the sign on the door, and I'll put it up on the screen for the people watching.
Attention to all who enter here. If you are coming into this room with sadness or sorrow, go elsewhere. The wounds I received, I got doing a job I love, supporting the freedom of a country I deeply love. I am incredibly tough and will make a full recovery. What is full? That is the absolute utmost. Physically, my body has the ability to recover. Then I will push that about 20% further through sheer mental tenacity. This room you are about to enter is a room of fun, optimism, and intense, rapid regrowth. If you are not prepared for that, go elsewhere. From the management.
And I know it brought you a lot of attention, maybe more than you wanted at the time, for what I understand. So how do we avoid that victim mindset? What kind of mindset did you have in order to not you didn't want people to feel sorry for you. You didn't want to feel like the victim.
Yeah, I mean, the greatest gift you have in this life is a choice. You have free will. And so many people buy into this idea when bad things happen to them. They want to find somebody to blame. I call it getting stuck on the X. It's everything I speak about at events. It's my second book, Overcome, is all about this concept. And when you're on the X, it's easy to focus on the negativity and the things you've lost. And that's what leads to a victim mindset. You know, this person did this to me, or I lost my job, or, you know, I've been injured, or whatever it is. I see that in society even expanding. I think we have an epidemic in the victim mindset in our country. So many people who are buying into this idea of race, creed, color, gender persuasion, where I'm from, demographic, you name it, fill in the blank. And we're buying into this idea that I'm a victim and I can't be successful because I fit fill in the blank. And that's just such BS. Because the problem with that idea is if you really do some diligence and you know, get past the media who wants to only highlight the negativity, every now and then you'll find these amazing stories of someone who is no different than you who found amazing success. Why? Because they chose to get up and drive forward. And that is the difference. I wasn't going to sit there and feel sorry for myself. I knew that there was a chance that I could get wounded in this job. I mean, that was not a revelation. And I think I try and tell people that an overcome mindset is comprised of three things. Number one, awareness. Awareness that any given time, bad things happen to good people. It could happen to your family. It could happen to your kids. It could happen to you. It could happen to your business. You know, something so out of the blue that you never could have predicted. And if you live in this fake world that'll never happen, you're not going to be ready for it. It's going to crush you. So if you can at least have some mental awareness, okay, I never want something bad to happen to my wife or my kids. I would never want anyone to get shot in the face, but guess what? It's going to happen to somebody else. And so now that leads to preparation. And some of that's just mental preparation. And then the third part is action. You have to take action. You have to drive forward. You have to figure out how to get up. And that's what I did. And that's how the sign came to be. And that really shaped my mindset. The last thing I'll say in that is adversity is a gift. I was probably more prepared at any point in my life to go through something catastrophic. And a lot of people are like, man, how did you do that? It would have been very easy to lay in that bed and be like, this isn't fair. You know, I failed as a leader and I came back. And I will admit in the very beginning, I did feel that way a little, but then I shifted that mindset to like, hey man, you have all the tools you need because of what you went through before. So I try and tell people, man, be thankful for adversity, like navigate through it and grind and be bold and get to the other side because it's building an overcome mindset. It's making you better. So when you face further adversity down the road, you'll look back on that. You're building your adversity, your overcome muscles. And I try and tell people, you can never build an overcome mindset if you have never flexed those muscles before. You need adversity to do that. So if you run away every time it gets hard, you're not going to be able to flip a switch and turn on the overcome mindset. It's forged in the fires of hardship.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that young people have about being an adult? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I think this idea that, my happiness and comfort is paramount. Like, I think people think that that's, life is hard. And it ebbs and flows. Right now I'm in an ebb. And on paper, we're massively successful, but we have invested a lot into some new businesses, and it is every month is super tight. I mean, we are stretched, and almost every day there's a new challenge we're trying to overcome as we're growing these new businesses. It is uncomfortable. It is not fun. It is stressful, highly stressful. But I also know it is a temporary time. I call it the grind and growth phase. And I think that there's a lot of young people who think that they want to skip the grind and growth phase and go from success to success when they don't realize there's a massive trowel. You have to, from one success, I would just say every peak is higher, and you've got to climb down this peak into the jungle and the wild animals and the danger to climb up to the next peak. And then there'll be another peak and another peak. And every peak you want to get to, you're going to have to go through the growth and grind phase. And I think that's a misconception, the combination of the victim mindset and this instantaneous happiness and comfort that a lot of young people think, it doesn't work that way.
What do you think is the measurement of a good life? Like, what's something that we should measure to determine if we're having a good life or not? Or maybe you personally, how do you measure your life for how good it is?
Impact. I hope that I'm having a positive impact on the people around me. First and foremost, my wife and kids, my circle of people, that they will look to me and say, wow, my dad, my husband was there for me. He made me better. He helped me to become the best version of myself. And then from there, I think those rings go out. If you can make an impact on just a small ring of people around you, it would be that positive light that so many people are looking for. That's a hell of a life, man. I would love to know that at my funeral that people say, wow, Jason Redman, that guy made me better. The more you're able to push that impact out, the bigger the success, in my opinion. Is that, do you have to have achieved these high things to do that? I don't think so. I'm thankful for the things I've achieved. I still have things I want to achieve. But if I never achieve them, I still can focus on creating an impact. This is one of my shirts, man. I want to be the light. I want people to say, that guy made me better.
So my last question is, if you had a minute with your younger self, what would you tell him?
You're an idiot.
I like that. I like that answer.
Yeah, I would say, listen, you're an idiot. You need to find a better balance you need to seek out the best version of yourself sooner. And you need to optimize yourself sooner. Right now, I was probably living a 50-50 split of work, fun. I want you to shift that to 80-20 or even 90-10. Like, this life's going to go by so fast. And I wish I had the knowledge now. I wish I had the knowledge then that I have now. I wish I had invested more in business and been smarter with money. I drank away so much money. What an idiot. Like, I could be so much further ahead financially now. I could be, there's so much. So I would just say, it took me a long time to become self-aware. I would have said, you need to wake up. You're not as great as you think you are. You're only operating at about 30% of what you have the capability to do. You need to step up.